For our final panel, we're going to be speaking about leveraging blockchain in the area of sustainability. And our moderator for this panel is Mercina Tillemann Perez, the COO of the Global Blockchain Business Council. She spent her career advising players from Fortune 100 companies to national governments, to industries and emerging technologies and public health. She's spoken at the G20 Summit, worked with Nancy Pelosi in her office, and has done work for the Congressional Human Rights Commission. Mercina, thank you for moderating this panel. And I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then I'll turn it over to her to run it. So first up is Douglas Johnson-Poensgen, the founder and CEO of Circular, which offers blockchain and AI-based software solutions with the goal of improving traceability and sustainability in industrial supply chains. Using his 25 years of international experience, he aims to uphold a new global standard for sourcing critical materials, something that was mentioned in the previous session. Dave Treat is a senior managing director and global blockchain lead at Accenture, and he's certainly been a friend of this forum, spoken before. He's the driving force behind Accenture's global blockchain business, which is a global operation that tackles everything from R&D to full-scale business transformations for clients in almost every industry. He's also lead of Accenture's New York FinTech Innovation Lab and serves as a board member for Hyperledger, the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, and the Chamber of Digital Commerce, just to name a few. We also have Elena Bondareva, an advisor at PowerLedger. She's a high-level executive, strategist, and transformational leader in the nonprofit and clean energy sector. At PowerLedger, she's working to scale the US's carbon footprint through interactive energy within real estate. And finally, we have Pradeep Iyer, an executive board member at Hedera Hashgraph. Pradeep has been focusing on developing a distributed ledger technology as a fast carbon negative alternative to blockchain. And prior to joining Hashgraph, he's done extensive R&D on technological ventures of every kind, with a particular focus on chemical and environmental technologies. Mercina, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. It is such a pleasure to have this particular crew assembled for this conversation. As one of the panelists on the last session pointed out, tomorrow is Earth Day. And so I think it's a really timely moment to delve into some of the use cases that are actually making the world a more sustainable place through blockchain. And as I think we're all very aware, the pandemic really accelerated a lot of activity in the digital realm. At the same time, efforts to mitigate climate change seem to have taken a back burner to more politically expedient crises that were highlighted by COVID. And what I'm hoping we can spend a little bit time on, just to kick things off, is the bright stories of sustainability from the last 2 years. I'm not expecting that to take up the entire hour, but I do hope that the panelists can offer a little bit of insight. And Elena, I know that you had a few that you wanted to highlight, so perhaps we can start with you.
Sure, thank you, and a pleasure to be with all of you today. We actually have not seen much of that slowdown, right, in terms of the climate action. Probably fortunate, right? Being PowerLedger is in 11 countries now, and so there's enough sort of diversification to build on that. So plenty of good stories. I'll start with Uttar Pradesh. It's the largest region in India and is home to 1/3 of India's unelectrified population. And so a project that PowerLedger did with the Uttar Pradesh Power Corporation showed that through peer-to-peer energy trading, people were paying 42% less in energy costs. It was an amazing revelation that, of course, is a great story for developing countries. And so what's happened since is not only has Uttar Pradesh as a state legislated to enable peer-to-peer outside of that pilot environment that we did, that is actually spreading across India. So millions upon millions of people are now getting access to legal peer-to-peer and incentives to go with that. So we think it's an amazing, amazing story. And I'll give you just two more. In France, about 300,000 consumers now of Equateur have the option to choose their own energy mix. So imagine going on your phone and saying, you know what, not only do I want renewable, sure, but I actually want to send the price signals. I want the solar from my neighbor, or I actually want the hydro from the new plant. They actually have the choice to do that. And that democratization of decision making is, of course, what a lot of us talk about as one of the advantages of blockchain technology. And lastly, Thailand it is home to the world's largest peer-to-peer trading environment when it comes to energy trading. And it is a project called T77. Many of you may be aware. It's been in the media a lot because started just with 4 players, so 4 buildings, dental hospital, school, shopping center, and apartment building with different abilities to generate and, of course, different demand profiles. What they found in that is that even with only renewable generation of about 18%, they were saving 25% of annual electricity costs en masse. Fantastic for the grid, reduces that pressure on the grid, does all of these amazing things we know, such as consuming renewable energy closest to its generation point. That project is now scaling, and about 100 plus buildings are going to come online in those trading environments in Thailand. So for us, those are just 3, but they're kind of different and just amazing success stories that we're enjoying on this side.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Elena. And it is quite thrilling. I met your founder and CEO in 2017 when Power Ledger was truly just getting off the ground. So it's pretty incredible for me to hear about the way the company has scaled and all of those projects that are being deployed. Thank you so much. And Doug, I know things have been going at a very fast pace for you over the last 2 years as well. Do you have some stories that you can share?
Yes, and firstly, thank you very much for inviting me. And this is a really good debate to be having, as you mentioned in the introduction. Circular's business is traceability in complex industrial supply chains, and the reason we're doing that is because 50% of all global carbon emissions are generated by the complex global supply chains that manufacture the stuff that we as consumers all buy, whether they are supposed to be good for the planet, like electric vehicles and onshore wind turbines, but that are manufactured with unsustainably produced materials, whether those are batteries or steel that isn't made sustainably. And it's that problem that we're grappling with. So what's happened over the last couple of years is obviously there's been a growing sort of general drive towards greater transparency around ESG, largely driven by institutional investors and regulators, as well as, and the war in Ukraine has, of course, exacerbated the need for folks to understand rules of origin of materials. And so the idea of bringing traceability to supply chains is increasingly mainstream. The other thing, of course, is that we as consumers have all become a lot more aware of supply chains and their complexity. Start of the pandemic, which is where you started that question, we all became, not only expert epidemiologists, but also suddenly realized that loo roll was important and in short supply. Sorry to be slightly flippant, but the fact is that, today it's chip shortages, as well as avoiding raw materials, perhaps from Russia. And so actually, I think there's a far greater understanding of the need to gain insight into the deeper tiers of supply chains. This conversation is obviously around the sustainability impact of it, but it applies just as much to other aspects of illuminating supply chains, supply chain resilience, supply chain risk.
Those are so many excellent points, Doug. And David, I'm wondering if you can say a few words about how your work has shifted over the last 2 years and how it intersects with sustainability.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm going to pick up from Doug's talk track that we're deeply interested in this. We, as you can imagine, every one of our clients, and we serve the Fortune 500, or primarily or the Fortune 2000. This is top of the agenda of every C-suite. In all of the initiatives happening as they look to transform their organizations around the world, top of mind for all of them. But at the end of the day, and again, picking up on I think the fantastic work that Doug was just describing, to be able to change and incent behaviors at the beginning of a supply chain where someone is pulling something out of the earth or sewing it together for the first time, at the first moment, being able to get the value that comes out of the end of a supply chain back to the beginning to be able to incent and change behaviors is something that we've been looking at now for several years. If you did a search on Accenture and Red String, we've got a video that kind of describes the potential of bringing together digital identity and digital digital currency and supply chain transparency through blockchain to be able to have models and structures to be able to get that value come from the end consumer who's standing in the aisle in a store and recognizes, because they can see into the provenance of the good that they want to purchase, all of the appropriate and behaviors that we want to reinforce, going all the way back to the beginning, and then decide that they value that, and whether it's a tip basis or part of the transaction itself. We've measured it, and provably sustainable practices, consumers are willing to pay upwards of 6 or 8% more for provably sustainable practices. And so we need to tap into the economics of it to incent the right behaviors, going all the way back to the beginning, as a key initiative. And the foundational elements of digital currency, digital identity, and blockchain-based transparency, I think, give us the tools to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And I would love to dig in a little bit more on this point of transparency being a much richer thing than we've been kind of limiting it to, I think, over the last few years, with the conflict in Ukraine highlighting how our interconnectedness can become increasingly complex. And it touches really every aspect of our lives. But Pradeep, I would love for you to explain how Hedera has been focusing on this issue, because I know sustainability has become an increasingly large part of your work and your remit.
So thanks. Maybe let me take just a quick step back from a Hedera to my other hat that I wear. So before I'm active with the DLT aspect, I've been with A.B. Dennison for 25 plus years. And we basically have spent 80 years building a company that labels every single item. Okay. And so this is really where my head was. And so if you think about it, we spent a lot of time trying to make our labels greener and so on and so forth. So this is the R&D that we've looked at. But when I take a step back and I said, how much of the products have a label, or how much of the material is less than 1%? We don't really make a huge material impact, if you will. However, a label also carries a tremendous amount of information. So that's kind of where my head is. So one of our motivation is to have an outsized effect on materials, AKA packages, all the stuff that we consume. And there isn't a whole lot out there that doesn't have a label. So this is my bias. So it's that being able to have an outsized effect on everything, on supply chain, including sustainability, is how I'm thinking about all of this from an A.V. Dennison perspective. And that, of course, leads to sustainability and climate change and so on. Hedera was then something that we are very interested in and that's actually, I also sit there as a board member. And one way, and the good thing is, if we don't blow up each other in these crazy wars and all this stuff that we do across the planet, this is a great emergence of technology, and it's going at a fast pace. So, and I heard somebody describe this very well. If I think of IoTs, it's helping bring the cost of monitoring. If you think of AI, it's bringing the cost of prediction, if you will. And if you think of DLT, a nice way to think about it is that it's bringing the cost of trust. And so if you now have a blockchain, or whatever you want, whatever technology that you have that brings trust, brings transparency at a sustainable level, to me, that's exciting. And actually, that's why I'm super excited to be part of the Hedera journey. And we're also the first layer one the company that's actually in putting funds to promote this at a granular level.
Thank you so much, Pradeep. And I look forward to hearing more about your work and everything Hedera is doing. And underpinning a lot of all of your efforts is this question of carbon markets and how they actually function and whether they actually help to reduce climate change in the near term, whether they are enough to provide any significant change in these trends that we're seeing. And I'm wondering, from all of your perspectives, I know you've been approaching carbon markets from various angles, but I would love to hear more about your work and your perspective on whether they seem to be a functional mechanism for mitigating the effects of climate change.
Shall I jump in just to get the debate going? Carbon credits are a mechanism potentially to fill the gap, as long as they are representing a legitimate mechanism of either capturing or offsetting, real carbon. Certainly there's a degree of skepticism about the quality of carbon credits that exist. I think, and I would say this because of course I'm biased and this is what we do, that actually our fundamental challenge is shining a light on the deeper tiers of the supply chain that is not working sustainably. And the downstream OEMs need to start putting meaningful pressure onto their supply chains in order to try and use more and more sustainable electricity in order to manufacture the components, sub-assemblies, or refined materials that ultimately we all consume as consumers, because I think that's what we as consumers generally tend to want. We've worked on a number of projects where carbon credits, BHP announced a project with Southwire last year, first carbon neutral delivery of copper at scale. There was an element of carbon credits there which closed the gap. That's, I think, a decent use of a carbon credit rather than just the opportunity to spend away the problem that actually you should be tackling.
Yeah, and if I, again, picking up on that, the need for credibility in the notion of a carbon market to then be able to incent good behavior, have that transparency, and drive to actual outcomes. The need for standards around that. This is one of the motivating forces in pulling together the Interwork Alliance, which is just now part of the GBBC, was to recognize that if we didn't have a standards-based approach, and the ability to build common infrastructure to bring credibility to carbon markets that goes, as Doug is saying, all the way back to what gets pulled out of the earth and all of the subsequent processes, all the way through. The use of blockchain to be able to have an independent, verifiable store of information that traces and tracks and is auditable and provides the compliance and really underpins that credibility then of a subsequent primary issuance of a carbon credit and its secondary trading. The end-to-end provenance of that data, the ability to challenge it and to measure it, all based upon common standards, so that we're confident in where it's come from and who's signing off on it. We're missing all of that right now, right? The need to have that be much more industrialized. There are pockets of fantastic examples of where it works well, but part of what I was excited about, what came out of COP26, is that a further discussion around the cross-country agreements for some of the behaviors, the call for the private sector to get involved, and so I think all of the efforts around that we can proactively create those common standards to underpin a credibility to that system will give us a chance at a good outcome. If we don't have that credibility, it's I fear that we're just going to lumber along and actually just hide the problems in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd probably build on both of that and the notion that Douglas introduced as to, the credit itself really being less significant than what stands behind it. Where Power Ledger comes in direct interface with this is REX trading, and its newest feature is called TraceX, and it's intended to bring price signal transparency to the REC market, as well as remove the middle person if they want to be removed, and facilitate what only blockchain can do, which is this instantaneous and infallible sort of settlement of transactions. However, RECs by themselves as part of the carbon markets are potentially as problematic as they are solution focused, right? Where this becomes useful is if we are allowing price signals to drive towards 24/7 carbon-free energy. right? And then all of a sudden, if you know that it's not just a wreck generated somewhere halfway around the world because the price is right, hence the problem with markets in the first place. If it's the wreck that is generated within an hour of when I needed it, right? Because I'm trying to match my demand load to the actual renewables underpinning that. And it's generated in my region. That can be really smart as a function of the carbon markets, right? Because if my core business is customer service or hospitality or healthcare, I am not in the business of renewable generation. However, if me demanding, I want wind wrecks close to where I am, allows somebody else to create that solution, I think that's when this becomes really, really useful. And then when you add to this the general ability for people, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, to start decoupling energy from its greenness. I'm not saying we should, but as a source of liquid funds, it can be incredibly powerful and it's not understood enough, right? So if as a corporation or whatever, I've invested all of this in renewable generation, but then I'm having a tight quarter or a tight year, rather than laying off staff and doing other things, carbon markets allow me to sell the RECs from that energy. Sure, I can't double claim it, but that is actually a source of liquidity through carbon markets that can remove a bit of that anxiety of people going into their also on-site renewable generation.
Thank you so much. And Pradeep, did you have anything to add on that front before we move on?
I think Elena, David said it very well. The one point I want to also make is we need to do, there's a lot of work and we really need to measure. If I think of Peter Drucker, you cannot manage well if you don't measure well. And there is a huge amount of work, whether it's scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, the standards and the credibility. Because if you do want liquidity, you're calling this carbon market. That means people expect a value back. So therefore, the price for a carbon metric ton has to be high enough for a behavior change. You have to have transparency so you don't have double count. You have to have standards so that you can compare apples with apples and so on. That's really the hard work. And I don't think we can just shove it under the carpet. We just need to move really, really quickly. We need to move together as a planet, as a group. And we have technologies that allow us to do it. So we need to jump on this wagon sooner than later.
Absolutely, a very important point. And related.
If I could just add
yes.
one. I just triggered that both Pradeep and Elena triggered another thought. I think the other thing that we underemphasize is that at the heart of this also is the connectedness and the fidelity of the information coming from the physical world to the digital world, right? So any blockchain-based system, it's bad data in, bad data out, right? That ability to have the linkage to the physical world and whether it's data coming from satellites pointing down or credentialized information coming from humans certifying behaviors on the ground, in the fields, at the mines, et cetera. That interplay between the quality of data from the initial source in the physical world, linking it to the digital world in the right way, just super important in this whole conversation. Otherwise, again, we don't establish the right level of credibility.
Violently agree. We've spent more effort on that than almost anything else. Yeah.
And up to this point, we've really been talking about commercial efforts to move these things forward. I'm curious because efforts to legislate progress from the regulatory side have been very slow moving historically. How much buy-in from governments do you think we need to push additional progress? How far can the private sector spearhead changes in this arena without being pushed through regulation?
It's starting to happen. So in Europe, we have the European Batteries Directive that's coming related to EV and electronics batteries, which requires an embedded carbon measurement per battery, as well as demonstration of responsible supply chains, as well as circularity. In the US, President Biden published an executive order on America's supply chains, particularly around critical resources, critical raw materials necessary for things like the energy transition, but also other sources, which requires very much the same transparency, even if there wasn't quite the same focus on sustainability. So I see that coming from a regulator's perspective, but I'm just going to flip to a different example. The SEC obviously has recently published, its thoughts on requiring better and more auditable climate disclosures, for example, or ESG claims, in order that you can, wade through the war of the glossy brochure and actually help institutional investors understand what's real and what isn't, which of course potentially is a field day for the auditors, but actually all of that requires assurable data, which is where the sorts of solutions that we're all working on fit.
And Dave, do you have any thoughts on the role of government in all of this?
I do. I was cognizant. I keep following Doug, so I don't want to. I was giving silence to see if someone else wanted to jump in. But I do. Again, in violent agreement. I think what's also super important is that this is it is a classic motion, right, for us in a first world context to think about legislation of the end of these supply chains and the economies that thrive on the ends of the supply chains. And at the heart, again, my opening comments around focusing on the people at the beginning and the economies in the small, in the developing countries where really much of the behavior change that we're hoping to drive originates. It originates at the beginning of the supply chains. And so creating a fair economic model that encourages the right behaviors at the, in the places where often people are it's a choice between survival and a healthy action for the planet. Survival wins, right? It's understandable. It's regrettable. It's terrible, but it's understandable. Unless we can change the economic model at the source. And create the incentives for the behaviors that will ultimately then, as everything that my fellow panelists have been talking about, if you don't start from the source, then we'll never get all the way to where we want to be, because we're driving behavior. We're focusing on the behaviors at the end. We need to focus on the behaviors at the beginning. So anything we can do to engage, to have governments engage to create the right economic models and incentives at the beginning of supply chains, I'm afraid we're not going to get to where we need to be.
That's right. And I just also point out, at least from Power Ledger's experience across 11 countries, that this answer really depends on where, right? In Europe, a different legal system. And so we actually require regulation in order to be able to do something, right? And so the fact that from the 1st of July, every EU country has to create regulation to allow peer-to-peer trading between buildings. Rolled out a bit slowly, a bit patchy, delays, excuses, et cetera, but in those environments, regulation is absolutely essential, right? The example I used with India is absolutely essential in order for millions upon millions of people to even have a chance at access to electricity. Different in the US, we're a common law country here, right? I can do whatever I want unless I'm actually, reined back. And so here we have more perceived anxiety. And I think from our perspective, the role of government here really needs to be in demonstration projects and pilots urgently, because there is a perceived anxiety around, if I peer-to-peer trade to you, that actually makes me a utility, and all of a sudden triggers all kinds of regulation that I don't even begin to comprehend, right? Electric vehicles, there's some flexibility there. Could there be? But this is where government actually stepping in on various levels and saying, no, we will demonstrate how to do this. And the other advantage here of governments doing that is we are in America, and there is a little bit of that thing that if it's not happening here, it's not happening. And I can tell you all these amazing stories, and you can tell me all these stories around the world. We need these projects, like I've mentioned, that are not just 3 buildings, 5 buildings, a bit of trading. We need these massive demonstrations here on the ground. And I think that will take off with free markets. But that's why I think the role of government does need to be different as well, based on the type of legal system that we have.
And just to add to that, the common perception is government is slow and, technology leads and industry leads. I think this panel also agrees government plays a critical role. And one of the things we love to use is moonshots, right? Look at what a little bit of fear of being annihilated by thermonuclear weapons did. So, and out of that came all that technology. So countries come together, as we see right now. So governments can do, should do, and once you take that leadership position, things fall in place. We start taking the middle people out. We work the processes. So I think somehow, the voice of the youngsters who are asking for this needs to get so that we get a huge policy, because otherwise we can all have these technologies and we'll be getting our processes right. But it's critical that there's a role there to be played, and I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And I'm glad there's so much agreement on this panel, but also glad, David and Doug, you frame it as violent agreement, because given the friction on the previous panel, we have to keep it violent to keep things engaging, otherwise people are going to fall asleep. So to continue, we've spoken a little bit about corporations and their role and governments. And we have a lot of students and individuals listening in, and I think they're curious about their role in carbon markets and all of these, and whether there is a place for them. Elena, I know you have something to say about this, but I'm happy for anyone to offer their insight.
Well, happy to jump in. Look, for Power Ledger, it is very much about democratization of power and giving power back to the people. And that kind of jargon you hear from us quite a bit. And the reason for that is that that decentralization is absolutely essential in order for distributed energy resources to actually do what they need to do. And if we talk about some of the challenges politically currently and the pushback to fossil fuels, we can touch more on that. But I'll just give you this example. Asahi's largest brewery is in the Southern Hemisphere in the state of Queensland in Australia, and they wanted a carbon neutral beer. Not surprising given how the products are moving in that direction. However, their on-site renewable generation was just not going to be sufficient. Through Power Ledger, what they are doing now is they are sourcing excess solar from households and paying them in beer through the use of blockchain technology. So a van pulls up every couple of weeks and offloads as many cases of beer, carbon neutral, as lots of $30 worth of energy that you've donated. To the customer, free beer, because I wasn't using it anyway, or I needed the money or whatever it might be, right? To them, it is a self-funding marketing campaign that literally, except for a little bit of the transaction costs, is over 99% self-funding. They've never had this before. And also within 4 months of the launch of the pilot, with only 120 households at that time, 4 months, $3 million of free media for them globally, right? So when it comes to actual consumers engaging with this and all of a sudden realizing, and I'll give you just another example, right? Like my asset on my roof or my battery or whatever it might be, it is a source of liquid funds, right? And whether I just don't use it during the day and I can trade it for Starbucks or Safeway or IKEA or whatever might be, great, right? Or if I am out of work, this is where I think this becomes really powerful when it comes to economic benefits of energy trading. If I am out of work, if whatever has occurred in my life and I need a little bit more cash, well, I just trade more for the things that I need. That is an incredible and now kind of proven way, right, for actual individuals and communities to engage. And another application that is not beer related, even though that one is pretty exciting, is there is nothing stopping you next time you go to, from a technological perspective, next time you park at an airport, right? And you're going to be there parked for 3-5 days while you're on a business trip. You should be able to already press a couple buttons on your phone and say, sure, discharge my battery. When you need it, this is your flexibility services, or this is your ability to create a grid interactive building. This is your ability to maybe reduce upfront investment in on-site renewables to your airport. And that's fine by me. Just leave me 10%. because that will get me home if I just arrive kind of unexpectedly. And all of a sudden, rather than coming back to a bill, you're coming back to some cash, in your iPhone wallet, right? These are the kinds of, these is real, this technology exists, Powerledger is deploying it, municipalities and campuses are getting interested, and this is very much a way for individuals. And what I love about that, and part of what we're unpacking, right, is this sustainability. In sustainability, one of the hardest things, and I've been at it for 20 years now, as the rest of the panel, it's activating self-interest. People who care, they will probably do the right thing. Our whole journey has been, how do we get people who don't care to behave in the way that we need them to behave? And this ability to activate self-interest at a click of my thumb, right? That is the real power. When all of us start behaving in ways and charging our vehicles at times when renewable energy is abundant, etc., that is the behavior change that from the sustainability perspective, we're all dying to see. And I think that without blockchain, without activating through price signals this behavior, we're still either preaching to the converted or, banging the Bible over the head of everybody else. And that's not equity, and that's not progress either.
Absolutely. That was such a brilliant example. And I don't want to feed too much into stereotypes, but free beer is a really perfect way to get college students' attention. And with that, Doug, Dave, Pradeep, do you have anything to add about the individual's role in carbon markets and sustainability?
Well, sustainability generally, we as consumers need to be more demanding and demand proof, which is the point, of course, that Dave made.
No, I think individuals are not only important. What Elena said just triggered something too. If we are successful in surfacing credible data, we can shame those who may not be ready to, just from the data itself. One of the things I remember was, airlines used to lose bags a lot, and then the government, instead of putting a fine or something, they said, we'll just surface the statistics of how well how many United Airlines is losing bags versus Delta. And as soon as they saw those numbers, they said, oh my God, this looks terrible. And they competed with each other and brought it down. So in a similar way, your carbon footprint or where you are can actually become very, very powerful. That's why as an Uber driver, you never get into a car that's less than 5 ratings. That's because it's a self-selected system. So again, if we bring this data that is credible, decentralized, easily available, the users can powerfully move industries and end users.
If I may just add to that, because you mentioned Uber, so one of the initiatives that hopefully will hit all of our phones shortly is the ability to also pick a driver that charges their EV with 100% renewables, enabled through Powerledger by blockchain. Because again, then as a user, not only do I want it 5-star for safety and cleanliness and all the free candy, but I want this to be powered with renewables, right? And that is that ability to start using that market demand to create more and more change.
We've spoken a lot. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, I was going to be, besides just kudos for free beer. I think it's just brilliant. But just maybe another angle on it for the audience. Get involved in the open source aspect, right? So I mentioned the IWA and token standards, and you just join, contribute. Open source, open standards, is also incredibly important in this whole space. And you can go get involved immediately. I think the other dimension is, and I'm sure I'm going to presume, and I'm going to presume to speak on behalf of all of the panelists. We're all hiring, right? The preeminence and the predominance of sustainability as an important business to drive important outcomes. We can't hire fast enough. So it's a tremendous focus to have in your education and school, and reach out. I've got a responsible innovation team that I can't grow fast enough, and I'm sure it's the same for all of my colleagues here. So don't be absolutely be aggressive if this is inspiring, and make it part of your studies and internships and the like. directly get involved in open source and open standards and contribute, and then, call all four of us for a job the minute you're in the market.
Agree.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, GVBC has a job board. We're very proud to have all of these companies represented as our members. And so you can go to that job board. And I think right now we have maybe 30,000 jobs posted. So lots of opportunities in the space right now to get involved. We've spoken a lot about the need for additional transparency. And I'm curious if you think consumers are ready for what they're going to find. Because in theory, I love the idea of understanding exactly where the yarn that went to knit my alpaca sweater came from and that entire process. I'm also probably a little bit less excited to really understand what ingredients go into my Oreos, and what that is created of. And I'm just not sure I want to see that ugly underbelly. And so I'm interested in your perspective on how we can inform consumers in a way that they won't be so horrified that they just close their eyes and don't want to see anymore and kind of numb themselves to the reality of so many of the products and systems that we use every day.
Don't pick on Oreos. They got me through COVID, and my weight proves it. But yeah, you've raised a great point, Mercina. It's interesting. I'm going to go a little bit afield and then bring it back. We were one of the first organizations to openly publish our gender diversity metrics, and we chose to do it at a time when they weren't good. But that, it didn't it was actually, that was the motivation to basically say, look, if we're transparent about it, then we're going to drive the behavior change. So I think that notion of maybe not focusing on what does the consumer want to see. I think the more that we can encourage the consumer, the consumer goods and all of the companies that are at the end of the supply chains that engage with consumers, I couldn't encourage all of us more to publish the ugly metric, because I think there's real credibility that comes from that authenticity and the genuine intent then to drive change. And then I think Pradeep made the point, or maybe it was Doug, of if we don't have those metrics and that the data openly out there, the behavior change doesn't follow. So embrace the bad metric as an owning a part of the problem and really sharing and conveying that intent to change. It's highly effective, and it doesn't I'll stop there.
I'd second that. In my life outside of Paraledger, I built quite a few impact models. And often the conversation is it to prove or is it to improve, right? And so the idea that we need to be learning from this, but I think to your also, Mercina, kind of original question, I want to address I think empathy and compassion in that. We get very judgy, and I've been a part of the sustainability movement for a long time. And one of the things that I speak on a lot is the us and them, right? Like, how dare you not care? How dare you not behave? And look, and we're hard on ourselves too, right? Like the fact that I still use a dryer for my towels, right? Like I feel guilt about that every day. I'm supposed to. My entire universe has made me feel bad about this. But the problem happens when we then disengage people from what we all need to do for whatever reason, right? For me, this is lunchtime. And I understand how much of a privilege it is for me to be on this, because it means I don't have a dependent parent or dependent child who is not going to get fed because I'm on a blockchain presentation, right? A lot of people simply will not have the headspace or the attention or the privilege of rosé wine functions, right? To learn a lot about this. And I think having patience and being more playful and using gamification and all these amazing things we talk about when I talk to blockchain technology, I think is really important, so that we're not judgy, so that we're not kind of the how left can become very, I mean, if you've been to Whole Foods without your own roll-up bag, you have seen the stairs, right? I would like for us to not create that feeling for people who are not acting on the information that has been available to everybody, but they're just not in a position or headspace to drill all the way down.
A couple of thoughts listening to you and David, Elena. I'll give you my chemist perspective, and I might be an outlier in this thinking, but more is better. We as humans really need to know where we come from. We are what we eat, and everything that's in the soil isn't the nicest thing. So we have to stop kidding yourself, and it's okay to surface what the ingredients are. So that's just my perspective. It's just saying, is that too much? It's never too much, unless it costs too much to surface it, would be my point. Yeah. And I think, Elena, to your point, the other big thing in all of this is trust. At the end of the day, the platforms, our behavior is so much dependent on trust. And I think it was Francis Fry who said there's three things. It's definitely empathy, authenticity, and logic. These are the three primary pillars of trust. You mentioned empathy. Logic is the process and the measurement, the quality of measurement. And so these three things are important as we think about the system. And finally, if you don't have the trust, these systems will not work. And we need to have this as a web that is trans-border, because this is the problem that we're trying to solve. This is it's a planetary. There's no borders here. And so our technology and our solutions need to be as such.
Our consumption of stuff does have an impact on the people, on the some of the poorest people on the planet, as well as the planet itself. And actually, it's probably a very good thing if we can all shine a light on it. I think most of us would consider child labor unacceptable in our EV supply chain. Most of us would think that the use of forced labor or child labor in, for example, the textile supply chain is also thoroughly unacceptable. But as long as we don't see it, it's sort of something that doesn't upset us over our cornflakes.
What I would add, though, is I think transparency is one of those things that has been known to rejig industries, right? Let's just take, I've mentioned reg trading, so I'm going to stick to that example. One of the reasons that PowerLedger is launching TraceX is because right now there is almost no price transparency, right? If you wanted to go and buy some regs, you're sitting there, you're doing some research, you're going to a broker. But let me just give you the context. If you bought or sold reg for $1 difference to what you could have, if you bought or sold 40,000, that is $40,000. And if you're a big trader and you did $1 million, that is $1 million just on the difference of $1. What that does mean, though, and this is maybe a little controversial, is there are people who will always not want more transparency, who have built their power precisely on the lack of transparency. And I'm not pointing out any intermediaries in particular, but we've seen this with sustainability consultants, right? First, we held everything so close to our chest, and then all of a sudden, right, systems exist, and you can now kind of, even on Amazon, pick if somebody has a climate pledge, right? So all of a sudden, you don't need a consultant that's going to charge $300 an hour. And that hurts that consultant for that moment. So I also think that we need to realize that there will be pain. We are causing pain. We can all agree that it is necessary, but it's always about the redistribution of power, and transparency very much redistributes power, and a lot of players will not like it. And hopefully they'll decide, you know what, I'm just going to move with it. But I think we do need to be aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm mindful of time. We have about 10 more minutes. So I want to get quickly into all of your work and the specific projects that you are focused on in terms of sustainability. So Pradeep, let's start with you. I know Hedera's HBAR Foundation recently launched a $100 million Sustainable Impact Fund. And I'm curious about what the focus of that fund will be and how you're approaching this issue.
Yeah. So the council voted to actually allocate a far greater amount. And so the 100 million that you're talking about is primarily focused on sustainable impact fund. So there is a much larger movement, but this is also a great initiative, I think, to spearhead. The single biggest approach is to make this, so those who get the grants, they're not looking for any equity position, but essentially just what David was saying is allow these open source standards to come about and get that hard work done. And so there is at least 10, 20 projects that have already been funded and a whole bunch, up to 100 in the pipeline. So I think those who have the energy, the technology, I would say, please reach out to the foundation, because they are here to make a standard so that the quality of information is good. So that's really primarily to enable this. And ultimately, the goal is really to make this open source and transparent. So this catches this. There's a virtual cycle, positive cycle that will come out of this.
Wonderful. Well, I look forward to tracking progress and sharing updates with our network over the coming months and years. And Doug, what is the big news for you and Circular in terms of sustainability and what you're engaged on?
Obviously, we've been working for a while on the EV battery supply chain, and that's extending now into other complex industrial supply chains, particularly things like construction, green steel, green cement, obviously, an increasing driver. But if I abstract from the specifics of some of those very polluting supply chains, we're increasingly getting requests from particularly, the audit firms for access to pools of data that allow companies to demonstrate that they are operating more sustainably. I mean, in the UK, where I'm sitting at the moment, we've just passed legislation which comes into effect this month for corporations to publish climate action plans with milestones, which their auditors, their financial auditors, will have to check. Ultimately, this is a huge data challenge. And if you look beyond that question of, how do those boardrooms, and this is a theme we were talking about earlier, how do those boardrooms start to demonstrate they're making a difference? There's another side to this, which I can see starting to grow in prominence around the circular economy as well. Recycling of things like aluminium is well established. But actually, generally, we are collectively not very good at recycling, reuse of scarce commodities. I mentioned construction. A huge amount of construction waste just goes to landfill, which frankly is a waste of resources. And so one of the challenges there is not so much knowing where stuff is, but actually also designing for circularity. One of the challenges of raw materials is if you don't know what went into a particular piece of engineering plastic or a particular piece of aluminium part in a vehicle, you can't necessarily recycle it. You can downcycle it, but you can't necessarily reuse it in an appropriate engineering context, particularly with alloys and things. So as companies start to think about how to design for circularity, they actually also need abiding ledgers for the long term of, whether it's inventories of raw materials going into buildings or into vehicles or into plant or all sorts of things, so that they can actually be properly recycled at the end of their life. So, that's something I see coming over the next 5 years or so. But if I look out 10, 15 years, I think the digitization of supply chains is in its infancy. I'm not talking about the OEM and their tier one and their logistics beyond. I'm talking about the deeper tiers of the supply chain and the development of those supply chains into things like the circular economy. We are at the start of the sort of revolution of data that we saw with ERP systems in the corporation, my view. And over the next 10, 15 years, I think we will revolutionize our collective understanding of what goes on as we try to make things happen in these supply chains. And there's huge opportunities for that digitization to drive efficiency as well as sustainability.
Mm.
Certainly, and Circular is truly at the forefront of all of this progress. So I encourage anyone who is interested in these issues and areas to continue tracking Circular's progress. Elena, I know we've already talked a lot about huge things that Power Ledger has been doing over the last few years, and I'm curious if you can touch quickly on kind of what's next and what you're excited about.
Sure. Look, I think that what I'm really excited about, and this is going to tie into David's Oreo example, is I'm really excited about the shift to 24/7 carbon-free energy. I think that's actually for us, as you saw, lots is happening, lots of progress, but that's probably been the biggest change. And the reason I mention Oreos is logically, I think we understand that however many, let's just take red wine, right? If I say I consumed X number of cases of red wine, it matters when. Right? If it's just spread over the year, no big deal. If I consumed all of that over the weekend, I might not make it. And so, right, on a logical level, we kind of understand that renewables are not a net situation. However, I am to blame for some of this. I helped establish four green building councils in my earlier career, and we were thrilled. We were so proud of ourselves when we got to net zero language with carbon. Right. And so now we're kind of going, that is not enough information. If you actually want to send the right signals, and if you want to be generating renewables, not add when they're needed and where they're needed, that's a huge shift. And so my hope for the future is that drives local energy markets that may have peer-to-peer, that may have loyalty, solar exchanges, like I've mentioned, but local energy markets that can actually start reducing pressure on the grid to be investing in more peaker plants and all of those kind of resilience functions, right? But also giving that power back to the people, local energy markets of communities of, several apartment buildings and multi-use kind of spaces going, you know what, we're going to trade with each other first, and then we're going to go to the grid next. The amount of potential in that for everybody involved, from keeping money inside a community to energy resilience and reducing our reliance on fossil fuels to grid resilience, is tremendous. But that's where I'm very much hoping that we get to sooner rather than later.
Well, if the last 5 years have indicated the speed with which things can move at Power Ledger, the next 5 are going to be really, really exciting. So can't wait to continue tracking your progress. And Dave, to close us out, Accenture has made some very big announcements recently about your investments into ESG and the sustainability space, particularly as it relates to effective data analytics. I would love for you to touch on this briefly and kind of the sustainability goals that you're looking forward to.
Yeah, no, thank you. So we our Chief Sustainability Officer, Peter Lacey, the role in our organizations just over the past 8 years is just accelerated the importance, and he's built an amazing team. And I really was very serious that it's important to every single one of our clients and to us as a company. We just hit 700,000 people. We're a global organization. We have, we're very cognizant of our own footprint, and have, made, tremendous, we've prioritized our own sustainability, deeply, but I kid you not, it's every industry, right? We serve all 19 industries. We're a global organization. It is everything from the velocity of fashion and the velocity with which new clothes and new fashions hit the market has dramatically increased. That is wildly consumptive. And what does that mean? To sustainable aviation fuel and the means and mechanisms to bring more sustainable fuel to an industry that obviously drives a ton of consumption in a non-pandemic context, and we're getting back there quickly, all the way to some really interesting stuff around green cloud. And I caught the end of the last panel. We're very focused on the ability to look at our tech development processes, practices, and hardware utilization. There's some tremendous ways that we can actually drive efficiency in just the IT development lifecycle. But yes, the data underpins all of this. If we don't have good data, we don't have good metrics, we're not using the power of what AI and machine learning can do to drive at those efficiencies, we're not going to get there. And so that is a massive focus of ours, and a focus across our practice. So we embed it into everything we do. It is a wildly important part of our business.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for making the time to join us. For all of the students listening, these are the companies I would be looking at to work for if I was just about to graduate from college. They're doing incredible work. There are amazing opportunities. So I really do encourage you to look at those job boards, to look at the opportunities that are available. And I found this conversation to be very uplifting and encouraging and hopeful that maybe as a globe we can move towards the marks that we've set. There is much work to be done, but thanks to all of you, I think we are headed in a great direction. So thank you again for taking the time, and happy Earth Day tomorrow.
Happy Earth Day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
all.
Thanks, Mercina. That was great. I don't know about the folks in the audience, but in terms of information flow over the last 3 hours, for me, it's been like drinking water out of a fire hose. I want to say a couple of things about these technologies and movements, because they're much more than research materials and talking points for speakers and panelists. These innovations have the potential to slow the course of climate change, to modernize economies, and revamp the way people think about sustainability. But it'll take time, and there'll be bumps in the road. But that's the nature of the long game. To look past the way things are and think of the way things can be. That's the nature of blockchain. So thank you to all our panelists, speakers, moderators, and staff who've worked on putting this together. And a special thanks to our partner, GBBC, and to Mercina Tillemann Perez, without whom this would never have happened. Finally, thank you all as an audience for giving us this piece of your time today. So thank you.